Welcome to TriloTalk. This is a podcast dedicated to topics that we think are important to the profession of medical writing. And our goal is to bring these topical issues and ideas to the forefront and spark conversations in the medical writing community. Hey, I'm Julia Forjanic Klapproth, Senior Partner at Trilogy Writing and Consulting. And today's podcast is going to be about something a little different: medical devices. Like for drug development, medical devices need to go through an approval process before they're deemed safe and effective to be used in the market. And there are many regulatory requirements from the FDA, the European Commission, ISO, and others that provide the guidance we need for device development and define the clinical evaluation process in different regions. But, of course, devices are not the same as medicines. And we thought it would be interesting to talk about the unique aspects of writing dossiers for medical devices and what people should know about these. So I'm very pleased to have two of Trilogy's device writing experts with me today, Laura Collada and Heidi Chapman. And together, we're going to do a deep dive into device dossiers from a writer's perspective. So, hi, Heidi. Hi, Laura. Welcome.
Thank you for the introduction.
Hello.
So many of our listeners are used to writing drug dossiers. And I think it would be good to take a moment to just set the stage and talk about what a device dossier looks like and how it's different. What documents are involved? What would a writer need to know to write these?
Yeah, I can start on that. So the technical file or the technical dossier of a device contains all the story of the device from beginning to end. So that means that we start with the concept or the prototype designed, and we go on to the marketing of the device. Now, one of the steps is the clinical evaluation, and this is where medical writers are most involved in. And this is because the clinical evaluation is a continuous process, which means that its documentation needs to be produced on a regular basis. And the first step of the clinical evaluation is drafting the state of the art, which is a very strategic document, I would say. It sets the scene, clearly sets the scene. It describes the condition that's being addressed by the subject device, its incidence, what's currently used to approach that condition, be it a pharmaceutical approach or a competitor device. And in a way, it's the document that we use to establish the safety and performance parameters to evaluate our own device or the subject device. Now, of course, the clinical evaluation of our new or novel device is different from the one of an already existing device. So for new devices, we would need data from a clinical investigation, while for already marketed devices, we would retrieve data from publications, registries, or even use data intelligence techniques. I don't know if you agree with that, Heidi.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Laura, one thing I think that would be helpful, since most of our listeners are drug writers, is to take and do a comparison of the different document types that you would use for a drug dossier and compare them to the device dossier. Okay. So, if you think in the preclinical step on the drug side, you'll do in vitro and in vivo pharmacology studies, you'll do toxicology studies, PK and PD, drug metabolism. On the device side, you will also do something like a functional performance and bench testing. You want to see, does the product work the way it should? And then you would also do things like a usability engineering and human factor studies. Can the end user use the product as it is intended? So now let's take a look at the clinical phase. On the drug side, you typically do phase 1, 2, and 3 studies. And Laura, correct me if you disagree, but for me, typically, I don't hear about device studies being phase 1, 2, and 3.
No, not at all.
No. So typically, I see them as, or hear about them as pivotal studies,
Mhm.
traditional feasibility studies, and pilot studies. I actually did those backwards, but pilot would be first, traditional feasibility, and then pivotal. And the different document types you would use on the device side for those types of studies are the clinical investigational plan, which is similar to a clinical study protocol, and you would use a clinical investigation report to report on the results, just like you would do a clinical study report. And so now you get into the dossier, submissions for approval. On the drug side, in the US, you'll have an NDA, and in the EU, you'll have an MAA. And at the document level, most writers are involved in the 2.5 and 2.7 modules.
Mm.
On the device side in the US, you, instead of a 2.5 or a 2.7, you would submit a PMA, a pre-market approval application. And then if you have a device that's similar to something that's already on the market, you could submit a 510K notification. In the EU, Laura was previously talking about the clinical evaluation process as an ongoing process. That when you do conduct a study and have data to report, you would submit a clinical evaluation report to talk about those investigational studies and reports, as well as bringing all that additional data in.
Yeah, no, exactly. And there are some exceptions to the rules, Heidi, but I think the main concept to grab here is that the depth of a clinical evaluation depends on the risk class of the device. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, and the regulations do guide us on how to produce robust reports. So yeah, that's another interesting point.
Okay, so I think that, I found that incredibly helpful, just mapping out how do these documents compare. Um, what are common challenges that the medical writers are going to face while they're preparing these documents?
So there's a lot of different challenges that come to mind. Couple of them off the bat would be non-compliance with technical standards. You need to know the regulations and the guidelines. And this is so important. I've actually worked with clients who have paid for a third-party consultant to
Mm.
go through and review the documents before the application is actually submitted. And I've heard of other clients having like an internal audit of all their documents before they submit them. So I do think having that knowledge of the regulatory requirements really goes a long way. In addition, I think having historical knowledge of the product is helpful. And it's not always easy for a medical writer to get that, but um, it is helpful. So, like, if you don't mind, I could share an example, a recent
Yeah, please.
example. So, I was recently working on a project with a client, and the question came up, should we include CVs for our CER? And we started looking at the regulations. And then a team member who has been through multiple submissions working with the same notified body said, look, you know, we're submitting to this particular notified body. We've talked to them before. And because this is an integral drug device combination product, we do not need to submit the CVs. They just need to be on hand. So historical knowledge right there saved a lot of time.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, for sure.
One more thing that I'm thinking about is um, in terms of challenges that writers face preparing dossiers is dealing with incomplete data. There is so much data that we need to sift through, and that it is not similar at all to the drug studies. When you do a device dossier, you need to, have all this, sift through the data to determine if your device is state of the art. Do you have enough data to establish that your device is a well-established technology? Do you have enough data to show that your device is equivalent to another device? What claims are you making? Do you have enough data to support those claims? Do you have enough data to demonstrate that you meet the general safety performance requirements? Um, there's
And
also
if this is a new device, let's just assume that, where is all that data coming from?
It
that
would
data is.
come from, yeah, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
It would come from clinical investigations. You need to
Yeah.
produce the data.
Okay, so because I know there's a lot of literature data
Yeah.
as well, real world data that's being pulled.
And
Where is that coming in?
from the literature searches that you use to establish if a document is state of the art, or
I'm
if it's
just
a well.
thinking because you're talking about these masses of data, and I'm thinking
Yeah.
about it from a drug development, and you're saying it's very different. I don't see the difference. When I'm doing a drug development dossier, there's masses of data too that we have to sift through and pull the messaging out of. So I'm trying to understand what's the difference. Why is there a difference in sifting through the masses of data for a device as opposed to sifting through the masses of data for a drug?
I think it's the different types of data that you have to sift through. I don't typically sift through, I don't typically do a literature search for a drug submission, and I don't typically read 60 articles and then determine from those articles that the device is state of the art or it's a well established technology. When we submit a drug dossier, yes, we have claims about the benefit and risk. So that could be similar. But, there are certain general safety and performance requirements that we need to actually, present data that meets GSPR number 1, GSPR number 8. They're very, very specific, and that's not something that you see
And
in
what's
the.
GSPR?
General safety and performance requirements.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's
And
quite a few of them.
yeah, and tell me if I'm wrong, Heidi, here, but there's another interesting bit in literature searches and retrieving the data from publications. While when you report on a drug, you would clearly mention the name of the compound. That's not always the case with devices. So let's use an example, a suture, right? You may need to look for publications on surgery to find that data that you're looking for, but you need to derive that data and make sure that what you are retrieving from the publication is applicable to your own device, and that's not always straightforward. So I think in a way, medical writers, we are used to playing Sherlock Holmes with with literature searches and appraisal, and we have that that eye to look into the data that we are looking for.
So what I'm hearing is, in a device dossier, the challenges in terms of the data are actually above and beyond the data that we collect in our studies. It's coming from the fact that you have to go and somehow, like you said, play Sherlock Holmes and find the information in the literature. So it's really this literature aspect of it that makes it different and more challenging.
It does. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the classes, the different classes. Can we just maybe explore that a little bit? What the classes are, how they impact on writing these documents?
The lower the risk class of a device, in my experience, the more difficult it is to evaluate the device. Precisely for what we've been saying, it's very difficult to find the data. So you would easily find publications on a cardiac stent, right? On a prosthesis, for example. But it would be very difficult to find data on really lower risk devices. So that's one of the main aspects, I would say.
It's interesting. It sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? It seems like a
Exactly.
higher risk would be more complex, but it makes total
Exactly.
sense.
In my experience, it's the other way around. The higher the risk, the easiest it is to evaluate, because the state of the art is very clearly set out there, and you have lots of data to go through. The safety and performance is very well defined. You know them in advance, and you do not need to be creative. While for lower risk devices, you do need to think outside of the box.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I would say for the higher class devices, you're definitely going to have those clinical investigation reports. So then that's more similar to what you're used to for a drug submission. You've done XYZ study, here were the endpoints, here's the data, here are the conclusions.
Yeah, that's right.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
So how can medical writers really support and add value during this clinical evaluation process? What is it that we're doing that really enhances the process?
I think medical writers need to be able to speak the language. You have to know the terminology. You have to have a working knowledge of the regulatory requirements. You have to um, be able to correctly interpret the data. And I recognize, Julia, that this is not anything unique to being a device writer. This is
Mm-hmm.
what is considered unique to being a good medical writer.
Yeah, which actually I think is a really good message, right? We don't need to be afraid as medical writers who haven't worked in the device area to jump into it, because it's almost a bit like, maybe this is an oversimplification, jumping into a new, more complex therapeutic area. The same thing happens, right? You have to learn the terminology. You might have to learn about some new endpoints that get used. You have to become familiar with what the teams are grappling with in that particular area. In this case, it's in the context of devices. You have to learn the jargon. You have to learn about the different classes and what the process looks like. There's some slightly different documents, but at the end of the day, we're still going in to try and understand or prove that it works, that there's no safety issues that anybody needs to be particularly concerned about, or if there are, how we manage those. And as you were saying, we need ultimately to show, is this state of the art? So I think that's a positive take-home message for medical writers. This is a growing area, and it's something we don't need to be afraid of, so to speak.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think medical writers are very well equipped to work on both worlds. We're used to think that medical devices are from Venus and pharmaceuticals from Mars, but I think that there are lots of crossroads among the two. So I would for sure not be afraid of tackling one or the other. And I think that medical writers writing for devices can support manufacturers also from beginning to end, because as we are drafting the state of the art, we have a very clear idea of what's needed if we want to design a clinical investigation. So we would have a very clear idea of what the endpoints would need to be, because we know what the data gaps are. And then once we have those results from an investigation, we clearly know how to draft that publication, because that's the publication in some years' time we will use for another clinical evaluation report. So I think having a team of medical writers helping out from the very beginning to the very end, helping in, for example, drafting a publications plan, things like that could be very, very helpful, and an additional value and additional support.
So a life cycle management aspect carrying on through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, that like when you're doing a drug dossier, you've got a team of people who are representing different functions. Are there different functions than you would have on a drug program? Are there more? Are there less? Does the team tend to be smaller? How do the teams compare? I'm guessing the dynamics are the same because humans are humans, but how do teams compare?
Well, for me, the teams I've worked on tend to be a little bit smaller,
Mhm.
and especially for the lower class devices, and you're not doing a clinical investigation um, plan or report, you really actually don't have a statistician. You definitely have a clinical representative, non-clinical. You have a safety representative. And then what's unique is you're going to also have like a human factors representative, and you also
And
have a
engineers.
yeah, and
Oh, engineers.
Oh
Yeah,
you will
yeah.
makes
also have
sense.
you'll also have a literature search person, because you need to have a literature search protocol and execute on that, and it needs to be done. There's all sorts of rules and regulations around that, so you usually have a professional literature search person on your team as well,
Mhm.
who conducts that search. Am I missing anybody, Laura?
I think the most particular profiles for us as medical writers are engineers and yeah, sometimes designers as well. Um,
Yeah.
Wearable devices need to be designed and be nice to wear. Think about, I don't know, I've seen, for example, external fixators that differ in their design, whether they are for adults or for kids. So for kids, we would use colors and things like that. So you do have different team members. And as a medical writer, it is really important that you speak their languages if you want to get to your objective. So you need to address, their concerns in different ways because they have a different background, each of them, so that in the end you put everything together to build that robust report that you want to build, or if it's a clinical investigation plan, then the plan, which I find something very interesting, and
It
it's really
is.
good fun because you do need to tackle different aspects in different ways, and it's very interesting.
It sounds like it can be very creative.
It is, yeah. It can be, yeah.
Yes. Yes. I've done the most de novo writing and doing CERs, and than I have anywhere else, any other document type.
Hmm, fascinating.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay, well, it sounds to me like in many ways the backdrop for writing these device dossiers is similar to the drug dossiers. We've got regulations in place for the clinical data, for the real world data, the sources that we might need to utilize. And a writer coming in is going to have to familiarize themselves with these to be able to guide the teams through the process. Yet there are also things that are unique to the dice arena, right? What I heard is one of the main goals is to demonstrate that the devices are state of the art, which refers to something very specific, right? If, as I understand it, it means that the device is current and generally accepted as the best practice or technology that's
Yeah.
available, right?
Exactly.
Yes,
Exactly.
and not the newest, most fangled technology out there. It's what is.
Established
Yes. Yes.
and well recognized. And that
Mhm.
is also fascinating, right? It's a slightly different proof that we're trying to have to bring in here. Not just it works and that
Mhm.
it's safe, but people believe in this. It's being used, it's well established, it's recognized. It is the state of the art.
And that's a really important concept, Julia, because your device needs to be state of the art today. So if you're working with a legacy device that I don't know, was born 30 years ago, you will still need to prove on a regular basis that it is state of the art within a time frame of about 5 years. And that's very important because, in those 30 years, newer things could come to the market and change the whole scene. That's why I was saying that the state of the art sets the scene, and you need to be within that scene.
Yeah.
You need to keep being there.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you could see that even if your device works, it's no longer state of the art.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
Fascinating. Okay. So I think this is a nice place to end, with the recognition that while there are some very distinct aspects of writing these device documents that are different from drug dossiers, the skill set that medical writers need really is the same. That's what I'm hearing. We need to be able to work with clinical teams. We need to be able to recognize where there's gaps in the data. We need to be comfortable with doing the Sherlock Holmes of going out there and sifting through all of this data. And we need to help our teams navigate the specific regulatory complexities of the device world and keep up probably with evolving guidelines. I'm sure just like in the drug world, the guidelines are not static. So, I mean, the world of devices is such a fascinating area. And I think ultimately, just like for drug dossiers, bringing a strong understanding of how to prepare these documents is really going to help us help these teams get new devices out to doctors and patients faster. And really, that's what we're all striving for.
Exactly.
Would you agree?
Exactly. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining me today. This has been a really informative discussion. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, take care. Thank you for listening to TriloTalk today. If you have feedback you'd like to share, or if you have any ideas for future topics you'd like us to cover, particularly something you think the community should be talking about, we would love to hear it. We would like this to be an ongoing conversation with medical writers at large, and you can send us your comments on our Twitter feed or our LinkedIn page. Just a reminder, you can find all our episodes of TriloTalk podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, Spotify, and trilogywriting.com/TriloTalk. Have a great rest of your day.